Hey Geordie, how are you? We're here again with
I'm
another episode of our Geordie and Josh podcast. I had a great time last time talking about Alanis and all of the 90s music, and I got good feedback on that. Did you
yeah,
hear? What'd you
yeah,
hear?
me too. And it's funny, people mentioned Alanis the most, but I didn't get a lot of like Prince and George Michael feedback, which is unfortunate. Maybe Prince and George Michael need to be reintroduced. Maybe they have like left the cultural lexicon and they need to
Yeah,
back.
yeah. Somehow we need somebody to do like a cover of one of their songs or something. Like Alanis is still performing, so she's still a little bit out there, but. And maybe that just means that people don't remember the good music from our
Right.
era.
Yeah.
Speaking of, we're going to be talking about parenting today. I was at the circus with my daughter, and it's a fantastic show. They don't do animals anymore. It's just basically human exploitation instead of animal, because they're all like really working hard and doing all these amazing stunts. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, you guys must be practicing for hours to pull off this amazing stuff. But the clown in the show, all of a sudden, as part of he's entertaining while they're changing the stage, and he played "Careless Whisper" by George Michael, and I was like, oh, that song, like that, the beginning of that "Careless Whisper" song, it just like automatically takes you to a point in time. It's like such a good song. But the clown didn't play Alanis. The clown knew George Michael, so there you go. But
Yeah.
anyway, we're talking about parenting today. So
Yeah, we're talking about parenting. We're both parents, and just a beginning disclaimer, we're talking about our perspective as parents. We have spouses, former spouses who are our co-parents, and we love them very much, but we're talking from our perspective. So there won't be a lot of we did this, we do this. There'll be more I and me. Just putting that out there. Also, we're looking for a sponsor so we can do a bougier studio space and maybe better audio. So
yes. Yeah, we're anyone who wants to sponsor us, we can record in a studio and we can have it on video and audio, and um, we'll just reach a larger audience and improve the quality, and it'll be super fun. So anybody likes what we do and what we're going to be doing, because we're doing an ongoing series on a whole bunch of topics that we have common interest on, and maybe someday we'll like argue about something. We'll be like, let's talk about some issue, but that's not today, but maybe we will, who knows, since the best thing about this is we're just talking. So we are about the same age. I'm a little bit older than you, but we have, we grew up in the 80s, 90s, and we have similar experiences. And I have two kids, you have one kid, and we just thought it'd be really cool to sort of talk about how wonderful it is to be a parent and how life-changing that is. And just like, I can't even remember a life before I was a parent. Like, what did I do with all my time and days? Like, I don't understand people without kids and how they like go through their days, because everything now is like constantly focused on that. But at the same time, it's tough to be a parent. It's really difficult, and there's so much we learn. And I don't know, Jordy, you want to just start off, talk a little bit about your parenting and what you remember? And we're still parenting, but
well, of course. And parenting is a great, wonderful, incredible experience, but it's something that you should really, really want. Not everybody really wants it. Not everybody should have to do it. And so it's especially, poignant that we're talking about parenting today when Roe versus Wade was just overturned, and there's a lot more people who are going to be forced into parenting. So again, parenting is a wonderful, wonderful thing, but you have to really want it. So being a good parent is choosing to be a good parent and making sure that people have that choice. Anyway, so parenting is good for us to talk about too, from a female or mother father perspective, and because I think we became parents in different ways. I don't know, I mean, in different ways in the sense that I didn't expect to get pregnant. I wanted to have children eventually, and I had just finished graduate school. I was 29 I think. Maybe I was 28. No, I was 28. Sorry. Very important. And I had plans, I wanted to be a community college professor. I was going to look for jobs and figure out where, actually, I was going to finish my PhD and then look for jobs and figure out where I was going to go in life. And I came back to Santa Barbara for just what I thought was going to be a short period of time to sort of face old demons and figure out things that were still kind of part of my unconscious that were affecting me. And while I was here, I got pregnant, as you do, and decided to keep her. And that's a key point, is that I made the choice to have my daughter. And it's obvious, I'm so glad that I did. I think that knowing what I know now about parenting, that my plan, which was to get a job, work, and then have a child, would have been so much more difficult than the way that I actually did it, which was to have her. And then I started teaching when she was 5 months old. So I got my job at City College when she was 5 months old. And that was having those months before I was in this professional career. So I had been a librarian before I was a teacher, but before I was really focusing on what I thought, this is my career. Having her before that was actually pretty great, because otherwise I would have been choosing in those first couple of months, which are very, very difficult, between like trying to be a good professor and trying to be a present parent and recovering from having a baby, a giant baby. She was a giant baby. She came out with like a full head of red hair and like could fully move her neck. Her grandfather said something like, I think you gave birth to a toddler, she gained, she was, when she was 7 days old, she was 13 pounds.
Holy cow.
Yeah. So anyway, she required a lot.
What was her birth weight?
It was 9.9, or it was almost 10 pounds. Oh. So she was gigantic. Yeah. Anyway, so my becoming a parent for me was sort of like, oh, I'm going to do this later. And then, oh no, I'm going to do it now. And making that decision, and then figuring out, okay, how am I going to be a parent? Because I had terrible parents, and I had read things like, oh, you're supposed to improve on your parents' parenting by 50%. And I was like, no, I need to improve on my parents' parenting by like 98%. So how do I do that? And the two things my parents did well are really not things that parents are supposed to do well. They taught me how to drink. I started drinking when I was 6. And so I learned how to drink and basically not get drunk and not become an alcoholic, which I know is kind of counterintuitive. And then they taught me how to hustle, because they were hustlers, hustlers for sure. Those are two things that you're not supposed to necessarily pass down, but those are the two things my parents did. So for me, I was like, well, how do you be a parent? Like, how am I going to be a good parent? So I spent those 40 weeks, and it's 40 weeks, not 9 months. That's something that people should know, is it's 9 months and 3 weeks. And you think that's no big deal until you get to 9 months and you're like, 3 more weeks.
And then I don't know with you, but with my wife, late, it was like almost 2 weeks late, so it's like, even it just goes on and on and on.
Right. Yeah. So 42 weeks for her. Yeah, which is a lot. You've got somebody's foot stuck in your rib cage that entire time. Your bladder is gone, like they've just pressed it down into a pancake. And yeah, I remember looking at myself when I was like, I don't know, 38 weeks pregnant, and I couldn't recognize any part of me except my eyeballs. Like, I remember looking at myself and seeing my eyes, and I was like, oh, look, you're still in there. been swallowed. Did you gain
a lot of weight, or you were just?
Yeah, I think I gained 60 pounds. So
60?
60.
Wow,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, not 16. I gained 16 pounds last week. No, 60. And then lost 10 of it when I gave birth. Anyway, so yeah, I thought about how to be a parent. I read a lot of different parenting books. I read books on discipline. I wasn't sure like what was the right way to discipline, what just in general, what to do. And I realized like parenting, while there's a whole industry, there's lots of marketing around books and devices and classes and things that we are supposed to do to get ready for parenting. There's really just like 3 rules that I try to follow now, which is to always love my daughter no matter what. And I know that seems like duh, that should be a given, right? But sometimes it's hard to really love them for who they are. It's hard to not project all your own crap onto them, or who you think they should be, or what you think, raising a daughter, for example, what you think a girl should be. All of it's hard to actually like sit back and say like, no, who are they and how am I going to best support them? That's what really loving them no matter what means. Is it means figuring out who they are and making sure that who they are is okay and that they're protected and taken care of in whatever that is. And then never lie to your kids. That was something I think a doctor told me when I was pregnant.
Mhm.
To never lie to your kids. And that again is hard because a lot of the time we're not talking big lies, like oh, we're moving tomorrow. Oh no, we're not. Not like those kinds of lies, but like the little incremental lies that you tell kids just to make things easier. Like somebody dies and you don't want to tell them because you don't want to have to deal with their emotions on top of your emotions. I had a roommate in college who her dad died when she was 5, and her mom told her he was on vacation,
Oh,
and they had like a whole funeral and everything. And she didn't find out for years that her
mhm.
dad was dead. She thought he was on vacation for years.
It's
And
sad.
yeah, and then when she found out he was dead, um, she felt really bad because she had been happy he was on vacation that entire time because people were so nice to her,
Mhm.
because they were nice to her because her dad was dead. But she was like, oh, when my dad goes away, people give me presents. I mean, how much would that mess you up for the rest of your life?
Mhm.
So there's big lies like that. And again, her mom probably thought she was doing what was right, when in reality, she was doing what was easier because she had her own emotions to deal with losing her husband. And then, also had to deal with the impact it was going to have on her children. There's those big lies, but then there's little things like, yeah, I'm fine. When, you're not fine, your kid can tell you're not fine about something. You
Mhm.
come home from work or something and they're like, what's the matter with you? And you're like, I'm fine. So what that does to them, when the person that the touchstone in their life that's supposed to be like the touchstone to reality, what that does to them when they know something is up, but you tell them, no, you're imagining it, that's what really messes people up. Because kids are resilient, people are resilient. They go through all kinds of things. They're refugees. Um, there's terrible things that happen to children all over the world every day right now. And we overcome it. But when we learn that our own instincts aren't correct, that our own instincts are something that we should question, instead of understanding like, oh, that internal voice that tells you the truth is right, listen to it. But what happens when your parents basically say like, no, you're wrong, is that you start to question that instinctual, you know, instinct that we're born with. And that's, I think, what really messes people up. So loving your kid, never lying to them, and giving them enough that they do something, but not so much that they do nothing.
Mm.
It could be money, but that's also love, validation.
Yeah.
I mean, I just said you should love them no matter what, but what I mean is like indulgence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't give them everything that they want. There's great benefit into overcoming adversity, and think of the person you are and what you gain from those experiences. And if you were like born in a Kardashian household or something, like how horrible a person you'd be, because everything was sort of just handed to you. Not to disparage them, I don't know them, but my point is, if you're born into like immense wealth or something like that,
Right. Yeah.
the thing. So you had you had a child. Did you think about having a second one? And like, so I have two kids, and they're 8 years apart. And so sometimes it feels like having one kid because they're in different places in time. They don't compete, they don't wrestle on the ground, they don't fight over toys. There's none of that going on. And there's pros and cons to that. And I'm really happy that we had the second one. But I'm wondering, did you think about having another one, or what were sort of like your considerations, and how do you think your daughter sort of was impacted by being only child?
Um, yeah, I definitely thought about having another baby. And in fact, I just assumed that I would have, because I had always imagined having kids, not just child.
Mhm.
But by the time she was a week old, I was like, oh, I can't do this twice. Like, this is a lot. Yeah, so I pretty early on decided that, again, parenting is difficult. And if you want to do it very well, then you have to give it a lot of energy. And I realized that if I'm going to parent her very well and then have a second child and parent that second child in the same way, I'm going to lose myself, right? And people might hear that and think, oh, that's so selfish. No, it's not selfish to decide I don't want to bring more people into the world because I don't think that I can give them all the same type of parenting that they deserve. That's the opposite of selfish, right? That's what we should be thinking when we think about parenting or anything. When we think about taking a job, anything, can I actually do this well and remain the person that became a parent or the person that got hired for this job? So yeah, so pretty early on, I had decided like, this is a lot and I want to do it very well. And that means, not having any more kids. And I, I think you have as many children as you want to have, as you think you can do well. But there's a real stigma to having one child. The whole only child syndrome, the idea that they're lonely, the idea that they're spoiled because they get everything that they want. I don't know what that is. I mean, it's a cultural ideology that comes from, I don't know, making sure that women have as many children as they can
Mhm.
in order to keep them dependent on a cycle of poverty. Like, I don't know what that is, but I don't find it to be true at all. I don't think that my daughter is more spoiled because she is an only child. I think that if I'd had more children, I would have had to sacrifice things with her, and then I would have felt the need to make that up. So I would have been overly indulgent in some ways, because I was trying to make up for the lack of attention or whatever, because I'm sharing that with other kids. So yeah, so I think, yeah, I think that there's a lot of stigma to having an only child, but I think that, again, you should drown out those voices, what culture tells you to do,
Yeah.
and figure out what is the right thing to do, what feels right, what is your capacity, and follow that. And if you don't want to have any children, that's the other thing, is a lot of people think like I have a lot of young female students who say like, I don't want to have any children. And I'm like, go with that. People will tell you, oh, you just aren't old enough yet, you just haven't figured it out yet, you will later. No, like, don't let people gaslight you. If you know you don't want to have children, don't do it to please the rest of the world, because
Mhm.
that's not a choice, right?
Yeah.
That's not you actually choosing to be a parent. So why did you have two kids then?
Well, I've always wanted to. Well, I didn't have any. Like being in the delivery room, where like that's the most times in life when I've ever felt like the strongest love for their mom. Like, holy crap! Like, I can't believe that this, as evolved as we are, as advanced as our technology is, the process for giving birth is so random and difficult and painful, and just it's I don't it's you can't explain it. And to watch somebody go through that, like, wow, it's amazing. Any woman has 2 kids. It's just like, I can't, that's, I mean, I don't know what your pregnancy, your delivery was like, but like the first one with her was so hard. It was so difficult. It was so painful. And that whole process. And then, my son was in the NICU for 8 days afterward. And it was just, he had a respiratory infection and he wouldn't come out. And it was just this huge thing. And it was just like, oh my goodness. But watching that, I'm like, wow, this is like the most selfless thing somebody could do, because they're actually bringing another child into the world. So when I say I wanted like a bunch of kids, because I always see myself as like older and, oh, they're coming to visit, and X, Y, and Z, 3 or 4 kids, but I didn't have to have the kids. So it's easy for me to say that because I don't have to like give birth to them. But so we had Jacob, and then that was such a hard labor, and then this is part of like what I want to talk about too, without going too deep, is that for me, the first 3 years are the most stressful on a marriage. It's just so difficult because all of a sudden you go from each other to, at least in my case, like kid, survival, kid, planning, sleeping through the night, structure, routines, toys, habits, like all that, your entire life changes. And so that experience was like, well, maybe we're just going to have one kid kind of thing, and then she decided like, okay, I'm ready to have another one. So, we had another one. And so they're 8 years apart. And it's good and bad. Like, it's really good because like we have one kid who's going to go to college soon. We don't have to worry about college for the other one for a while. They don't compete. They're not necessarily, they're not like, he's a good helper, reads, spends time. There's no competition. And she really looks up to him. It's not like they have horror stories of having to share a room or something like that. It's sort of, so there's pros and cons. And I really, what you have is what you love the most, right? Like you make that work, and that works for you. I was glad I was able to have a boy and a girl. I think that, everyone has their own opinions on this, but in my experience, they're very different. And I don't mean traditionally female and traditionally male, but they're different. And that's cool. My daughter's a lot more like me in many ways. He's like me in other ways. So it's nice to have them sort of play off of each other. But for me, the parenting is so difficult because I'm one of these parents. Like, if you talk to somebody who was around me during like 3 to 10 years old, you'd probably find people who would say, oh, he's a total helicopter parent. Like, poor Jacob couldn't breathe because this guy was like, are you okay? What do you need? And there's part of me that was like that, but I really felt in my own parenting was that kids really liked structure and the ability to depend on you to be the same always. And that was one thing I tried to instill, was that we're going to have routines, we're going to have structure, and you're always going to know what we're going to do. And that to me is safety, right? Like some people, and I've heard that's over structuring, and there's a difference in predictability and safety than there is in militarizing and structure being somebody, and so I really felt that was super important, was just knowing that every time they look at you, they can count on you to be consistent. And to me, you don't have to be wealthy. It's like, that's not a class thing. It doesn't matter. That isn't dependent on money. Like, if you're always there for your kid when they need you, just them seeing you, like I do in my social media handles, I always say a present dad. And what I mean by that is, like, anyone can be a dad, but to actually like sacrifice to like I'm with my kid right now when I could be doing a million other things. When you're
Mhm.
present, that really matters. And if it means you have to make less money, you do it. And it means you're not as important socially, you do it, because there's only one person, the people you're going to have the biggest impact on the world are not those people out there. It's the people in your home, it's your children. And so that's what I try to, that being said, as we know, it's super hard. It's just, you make all kinds of mistakes and you have all sorts of regrets.
Yeah, well, and with the tradition well, so one of the things that I had read and kind of heard about parenting before I became a parent was traditions are very important. So tradition and that kind of goes with stability. I think it's part of the same psyche is having something that you can depend on, or is sort of always there, always present. And so when I read that about traditions being an important part of stabilizing and forming a child who was psychologically sound, and
Mhm.
I thought, well, how do I do that? Because what is tradition? Like, I'm not going to suddenly throw up a Christmas tree, which I've never done, and join this idea of like the regular sort of holidays that we're supposed to follow, because it feels very disingenuous to me. So how do I create traditions that are genuine to me, so that she can see? Again, that kind of goes back to the idea of not lying to your kid, telling them that you're doing this tradition because you believe that it's correct, um, and also making sure that you implement something that's stable, that's regular, so that they have that psychological benefit. Um, so I started doing certain things like having dinner together. And I know that sounds basic, like you're supposed to have dinner with people, but actually having dinner with your kids and making sure that they know that they have a stable dinner time, which again, for a lot of people are like, yeah, you're supposed to provide dinner for your children. But that wasn't always true for me. Having like food in the house was not actually a given.
Mhm.
So little things, because of the way that I grew up, making sure that there were things that she would always know were there, and kind of forming that into a tradition or a regular part of her daily life. The availability of food, the availability of my attention, of certain things that would make her feel secure in routine,
Mhm.
and then incorporating some religious and or around, like, so her her dad's family is Catholic. I mean, they're not really practicing Catholic, but they're culturally Catholic. So joining them on Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve is a big thing for Catholics rather than Christmas Day. Her grandfather making abondigas, another like traditional Mexican Catholic Christmas Eve dinner things,
Mhm.
making sure that I was always there, even after me and her dad weren't together anymore, which that extended idea of family not being based on necessarily bloodlines or based on marital status or relationship status, but like shoving myself in, even if it made people uncomfortable, so that my daughter didn't compartmentalize parts of her life. Being like, oh, I'm with my dad's family, this is my dad's tradition. I'm with my mom's family, and this is her tradition, but making sure that she always had that fluidity, so that again, like, that's part of that regular sort of stable. She can always depend on this. So she can always depend on her parents talking to each other. She can always depend on her grandparents and her parents talking, like right, like me
Yeah.
talking to her dad's parents and stuff like that. um, and making sure that everybody is included in anything that she's included in. And
Mhm.
so creating stability and tradition in that way,
Yeah.
right? And so for me, even though Christmas isn't my thing, participating in those Christmas traditions with her dad's family is something I can get behind, because it is something they believe in, right? So finding a way to like get into things that were traditionally religious or traditionally part of some sort of cultural ideology that I didn't necessarily get. Being part of something that means something to somebody else can be as genuine as it means to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I was wondering while you're talking, how much did you have to work to separate your own experience as a child growing up from how you parented? There definitely were times when I would be doing something with my kids and then remembering when I was that age and thinking of how this thing was happening with me. And for me, it was always easy. Like I just would be like, I'm going to do the opposite. Like this is easy. I know what not to do. And so whatever I do is going to be better than what was. But I know some people kind of get caught up in that trauma of, I can't do anything. I don't want to mock. I shouldn't do it that way. But some people get caught up in that. They can't escape how they were treated and therefore can't turn the page or can't figure out a way to leave that behind while you parent. And so you see cycles repeated. And of course, we always even just subconsciously carry on little behaviors that we have that we probably are aware of, but we're going to pass on to our kids. But how were you able to sort of reset and start fresh and sort of know, like, I'm not going to give my daughter vodka, like, how are you able to do that?
Vodka.
Oh, beer, tequila, yeah. Whatever.
Yeah. My parents were rum drinkers.
Oh, rum, okay.
No, but it was beer and wine for me. Anyway, just beer and wine when you're 6. Come on. Don't get crazy.
Gotta build up to
it. Yeah. So there's lots of. So one thing is, like, I get really uncomfortable when I yell, and I don't think I yell that often. Also, if you ask my daughter, she might be like, "Who are you fooling?" But I get really uncomfortable when I yell because when I feel like out of control of my emotions. And it's funny because throughout my life, people have kind of criticized me for being like too buttoned up or too like uptight or,
guarded.
Yeah, guarded. But then when I get emotional, I get very uncomfortable because it just reminds me of like the erratic, violent, terrible behavior of my parents growing up and the feeling of complete lack of control and safety, and that I grew up in a house until I was 15 where there was no, like no safe feeling, like it was not a safe place to be. So when I hear myself yelling or like getting upset, it brings all that trauma back. And then I'm terrified that I'm gonna, create that kind of situation for my daughter. And it was really hard, especially in the beginning of her life. And I would talk to her dad about it a lot and say like, I got upset, or, I mean, it's hard being a parent, and my daughter has always been very, very attached to me, which is great. But it meant I was constantly with her. So whether she was like really, really cranky or like needed to sleep, or I mean, I was like, if I needed to do the dishes, like she was in a baby Bjorn while I was doing the dishes or doing the laundry. So you can't help but get emotional sometimes. And then I would feel like so terrible because I would feel like I was creating this trauma for her, and her dad would be like, no, she needs to see you have a range of emotions, and you're not your parents, you're not beating her up, you're not hurting her, you're not physically hurting her, but she's understanding that you have boundaries. She's understanding that things will upset people, and that if you act in a certain way, people might retaliate. They might be affected by that. And so I try to keep that in my head. I still try to keep that in my head when I feel like bad about a reaction or something, because I still feel that. And the other thing I would always hear and still kind of hear in my head is just my mom. So I'd be talking to my daughter or doing something with my daughter when she was a baby, or she's 15 now. So like through her life. And I would just hear my mom like, "You're doing it wrong." Be
Mhm.
like the voice in my head, "This is wrong." Um, that's what my mom sounds like.
Really.
Uh, and so learning how to like quiet that voice, be like, "What are you talking about? You don't know, you don't know how to parent. Get the hell out
Yeah.
of my head." Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so that trauma, it affects you in different ways. It follows you in different ways. Um, so you try to reason it out and think like, why am I having this emotion?
Yeah.
Why am I scared of reacting? Is it actually good for her to see me react in different ways? Or am I, scaring her and traumatizing her? Uh, yeah, so that definitely follows you, and you try to figure, and that's why I read a lot about discipline too, because I was like, well, how do you discipline?
Mhm.
Because I'm pretty sure that what I grew up with was not discipline, but I'm pretty sure that people need discipline.
Mhm.
And I learned that discipline, I mean, I don't know, I still don't actually know what that is. um I know that you kind of work around what, like, the situation that's happening. Like when Ruby was young, she would get really, really tired. She needed to nap. Like napping was a very important part of her daily life. And so she'd start acting out, but she didn't want to go to sleep. And so like, what is the reaction here? Like, do I put her in timeout because she's like, swinging the cat around by its tail and she's not supposed to be doing that? Or so I figured out different ways. Like timeout didn't work very well with her.
Mhm.
And I had read that instead of timeout, like actually creating, like actually like holding your kid. Some kids do better with the separation and then they calm down. But with my daughter, it was like grabbing her and squeezing her. I mean,
Mhm.
not like hard, but
Yeah.
like,
Let me show you how the cat feels.
you know, exactly. uh, but like grabbing her and like holding her close, and that actually worked and would calm her down. And yeah, so I think, again, like reading your child and figuring out what actually works with them, and
Yeah.
figuring out the the discipline or the structure or the boundaries that are actually going to work for your child, rather than just be a cookie cutter solution. When this happens, you should do this. Well, not necessarily. It depends on the person, depends on the kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was never big on consequences or punishment. I just like I never really see that working of let's do a timeout or I'm going to take this away from you. My kids aren't like that. I mean, people know my like they're good kids. So I've never really when they're not doing something, the biggest conflict is sort of like getting out of the house to go somewhere, like transitions are always the toughest. And what I found is just very less of me works. Like when they notice, oh, he's now just standing there and he's not really engaging, he's just waiting. That's kind of their nonverbal cue of like, oh, he means business. Like just sort of changing that tempo of the interaction, at least in my case, often works. But I mean, I'm just counterintuitive. If a kid's enjoying something, like the last thing I want to do is like, don't enjoy it. Like it's sort of like, let's agree on a time in the next 15 minutes and then we're going to stop, and then we're going to move on. But again, I think that goes to just that predictability and structure. But my kids don't break things. I mean, I just don't have those kind of kids. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the other side of parenting, which is once you become a parent, all this other new stuff, this whole world opens up to you. And you start becoming aware of where you buy stuff for babies and baby clothes and toys, and you have this network of other parents now. And so you're no longer talking about you're talking about you in the context of your kids. And I always say that kids bring out the best in parents and the worst in parents, because I don't know about you, but I'm definitely one of these people who is a judger. I sort of feel like wow, I can't believe you parent your kid that way. And most of the time, you're just quiet about it because if you're not, people think you're a jerk, and they're like, "Well, mind your own business," But every now and then, you're just like, "What's going on here?" kind of thing. But I know that, and I coach my kid in a lot of things, my son. And so you're just around kids all the time. You see the whole gamut of it. But what did you enjoy, or what do you enjoy about that sort of part of parenting? Do you like that social networking that comes with? I don't I, like. I always volunteered, so I was always like hanging out with a bunch of moms, and even a little bit today. Although during the pandemic we couldn't really volunteer. It's such a weird culture, What
Yeah.
what do you think of all that?
Yeah, well, that was one of the reasons I didn't want to have another kid, is because of other kids' parents. Like, really, like when I've thought about, because the first year of Ruby's life, I was like, no way. But then you get a couple years of space, and you're like, well, and then I would think about, oh, but you're gonna have to talk to people's parents again, and like it's terrible. Like, it really is terrible. And it's different from a male and female perspective. Dads are given a lot of leeway, and I'm not saying that doesn't mean that there aren't great, wonderful, incredible fathers that invest so much in their children. They do, of course, but I'm saying that you're given a lot more credit for it. You show up and pick up your kid from school, and it's like, oh my, I wish,
Yeah.
I had a right. Whereas, like, I don't show up and pick up my kid once, and it's, oh, well, I guess your career is just that much more important than your child, right? So there's a there's a lot more expectation that as a mother, you're going to always be volunteering in the classroom, always be the one to drop off and pick up your kid, always be ready to bring a freaking snack or whatever. Geez, like, I didn't even have food in my house growing up, and we constantly giving these kids snacks all the time, like take a beat sometimes. It's not always important that they have 10 juice boxes after they finish a sporting event or whatever. Anyway,
Those watermelon slices, the cantaloupe, it's really
orange slices, yeah, like scurvy is important. It's important to keep scurvy away, but at the same time, like, chill for a second. If they don't have them there at exactly the time the game starts, it's not even like not having them there. It's like, oh, the game's already started and you didn't bring the orange slices, like, well, they're running around, aren't they? Like,
they're still alive, aren't they?
So I always, that being said, I always volunteered in my daughter's classrooms, and like, she again is super attached to me, and I'm very attached to her as well. It's a two-way street. But like, when she started kindergarten, when she was in elementary school, especially, she wanted me there, and I wanted to be there, but I didn't want to be there organizing. There's like a real like alpha, and there's a real like power structure to like the moms, and it's generally moms and like maybe one dad who are kind of in charge of the structure of like who's going to do what and how they're going to do that. And you have to get along with that alpha mom at the top and make sure that and you don't always like her, it's like, why am I trying to get you? It's like junior high again. Why am I trying to get you to like me so much when, like, I can't stand you, and I don't think the way that you're raising your kids is very good, and like, and I think your husband's a drunk, so you should go.
Wait, were we hanging out in the same places?
I think that's the story at every single elementary school. It's the same thing. There's some UCSB graduate who married their boyfriend in college, and now they have like what belongs on top of a wedding cake of a family, and they kind of like play out the same role. But anyway, so I didn't want to do that stuff. I didn't want to interact with other parents. I wanted to interact with the kids. I wanted to be in the classroom, and so I would volunteer, especially with math, which was great, like for years and years and years. I would do math with kids while they were supposed to be doing math. I was terrible at math when I was their age, when I was in elementary school. I think I left elementary school not knowing what a fraction really was or what a decimal point really meant. And I think that's one of the things that can make you a great teacher is when you struggled with something, you understand that struggle so you can explain it that much better. So I would do things like that, like be in the classroom, work with students with math, with reading, yes, but like more and more so with math. And I did that like every year until she left elementary school. And then when she left elementary school, we started her in this funky school she's in now, which is like a half in-person, half homeschool school. And that's worked really well for her as well. But there's no, room for volunteering there. But the passive aggression of but it's really like other moms.
Yeah.
Like I remember in her third grade class, and I was in her third grade class all the time. And her third grade teacher was wonderful. Mr. Ojeda at Adams, just like a fantastic, incredible teacher. One of those teachers, that like gets like this whole generation growing up who went to Adams, that'll be like the teacher that they point back to and say like, oh, and Mr. Ojeda, right? Like, but I would like do math with kids in that class every week, and do other things because Mr. Ojeda let me, right, work with those kids. But I was then recruited by, one of the kind of like moms in charge, to show up for some ice cream social something at the end of the year and volunteer with that. And I was like, sure. But, I was at work before that. I think I was at a union meeting or like a union negotiating meeting. I was like negotiating the contract, for 1,000 people. And I'm like, well, I'm going to get there about 15 minutes late. And I get there and it's 15 minutes late and all the kids have ice cream and everything. And the mom's like, well, I'm glad you showed up. That's literally what she said to me. Well, I'm glad you showed up. I was like, lady, I show up all the freaking time just because I didn't get here right when the ice cream had to be given out. And again, with the snacks, like calm down. Yeah. So other parents is one of the reasons that I didn't want to have more kids. And the way that we're forced to interact with other parents and forced to get along with them just because we had sex with and chose to have sex with, just because we had sex and chose to. I don't know. Did your kid go to that kind of elementary school where everybody had like a key party afterwards? No, we weren't having a giant parent orgy after. That's not what I meant to say. Just because we had sex around the same time, chose to have a child around the same time, like we're supposed to be best friends. No, I don't think so. And yeah, and I think that me being me and being like a, I don't know if people judge me for having tattoos, but they might. But being like that kind of a mom who doesn't conform to what a mom is supposed to look like or act like. I think that was always something that sort of outed me or kind of put me on the outside and opened me up to a little bit more criticism, because it's like it's like any animalistic tendency, like you kind of peck the different one. So yeah, well,
no, that's really interesting, and a lot of what you said resonates with like my experience too. Is that my son went to a private school for K through 6, and I just have this thing where like I know some people might think like, oh God, you're such a phony, but like it's so important to spend time with your kids, and so I was always volunteering and just lunch programs anytime I could, overdoing it. I'm sure, the people get sick of seeing me, that kind of thing. But yeah, the moms are always like, oh, but like they're always so supportive of that. But there's a different kind of judgment that comes up among the dads, which is, what are you doing here? Like, why are you doing that? Like, why aren't you working? Like, why aren't you making $300,000 a year? Like what? Why aren't you an engineer? Why aren't you an investment banker? Why aren't you doing something where you're out working, and let the moms raise the kid? Like, let them, they like this stuff. you know, they enjoy it, you know, and there's a different kind of judgment. It's like what's wrong with you? Why can't you why can't you give your spouse the kind of life we do, which is, you know, they don't have to work, or they can work part-time, or they can do this because we're working so hard. And it's a whole different kind of judgment, because then you start to think like, well, wait a minute, maybe I should be working like 8 to 7 every day in LA and just letting them do it all and show up for the good times, you know. But my whole thing is that, yes, I'm broke. I mean, I'm not broke. I have more money than most of the world does, like, you know, relatively speaking, but not more money than most of the people in Santa Barbara and Montecito and Goleta, you know. And so, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the presence of being there, hanging out, pickups, drop-offs, doing stuff afterward. Those things are what kids are going to remember. And I think that there's a different kind of judgment that comes with that, but I don't really mind it, because I know that my kids are going to grow up knowing like, well, yeah, somebody else's dad, they have a really big house and nice car and all that stuff, but they weren't there for me in these little moments, like at the games, or just not even at the games, just like at home together talking. Like, that's super important. You can't make all of that up on the weekend, sort of thing. So
Right.
it's a different kind of judgment that happens there. And I just like, I believe that's like investment in your kid. Like I could go out there and tell everyone else how to live their lives. It's not really that important to me. What's more important to me is to spend time with people in your house and hope that they become good people. Like, you have a much greater rate of return on that than going around and saying you this, you that. But yeah, the parenting is like the relationships that exist, you know. And then you go through these phases, like for a year or two, you're all like hooked up together, and then you have a little argument about something, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, I guess they're gone, you know. And then it's sort of this natural cycle that happens, you know. So it's, that whole thing is really, really interesting. And having a second child, I think about all the things we did with the first, the play dates, like, can we go get together? We need to socialize them, and we need to make sure they're having fun. And then what it became was like, the parents are, we're using the kid as like a social outing, and these kids don't even like each other that much
Right.
anymore. And like, when that happens, it's like definitely time to cut the cord. What do you said your kid Ruby goes to a, what you, I know I at one point, I regret it, called it something, I'll repeat, but
Little weird school.
weird school, yeah, okay. Well, that's how, yeah, anyway. But what, like, grading expectations, do you put a lot of value on that? I know with me, I don't look at Megan, my elementary school's report card. Like, I
Well,
don't, I don't care, because I
well,
know what's up.
well, yeah, they shouldn't be getting a report card
Yeah.
in, third, fourth grade. Like, you shouldn't be getting a report card with like all the work that you've done over a year boiled down to one letter. I mean, that's not the lesson that children should be learning, that we go to school for an entire year. And that all comes down to just one letter of like, good job, or not so good job, or come on, you got to read. But yeah, so I don't even now, like as a college professor, I don't like boiling down their grade to one, like all the work that they do over the semester, the ups and downs, the vulnerability, the hopefully like points of understanding boils down to like B plus. And that's what's on their transcript for the rest of their life. I think it's a very, limited, and I understand the need for it. Like I understand all that the need for like having a transcript and being able to figure out if this person can move on to the next level or whatever. But at the same time, it's like, what are we really, like, what is the goal here?
Yeah.
And what are we teaching you is the goal, when it all just boils down to like one letter at the end of a year, end of a semester. So yeah, grading, like I don't remember what Ruby's grades were when she was in elementary school. I remember that she has a freaking phenomenal ability to do math, which I'm so jealous of because, like I said, I struggled with math so much, and you need math no matter what you do in life. You're going to need math at some point. So her ability to just like get stuff is just amazing. It's what happens when your mom doesn't smoke multiple packs of cigarettes a day when she's pregnant, or uh, um, or drinks heavily. So watching her do well and excel at different things, but then, you know, she's never really liked reading. And so getting her to learn how to read, like actually like get to a proficient level, because by the time she was in third grade, she was kind of like, her math would be above grade, but her reading was like at the, you know, barely like at her grade.
Mhm.
So I spent all this time when she was in third grade making her read out loud to me, which was so painful. So painful. Like a half an hour every day I would make her read out loud to me, and it was just like, it was real love right there listening to that for you. But by the end of third grade, she was like above her grade level, right? So, and you know, now I don't make her read. She's 15. I can't really make her do much of anything, but I don't make her read. She doesn't enjoy reading still, but she likes listening to books, and she listens to them on her phone. And I think that's because me and her dad read to her every night for like until she was like 12. And so I'm good with that. You know, I'm not going to force her to sit down and read for half an hour every day if that's not what she likes. I want her to enjoy what she enjoys and excel at what she excels at. And so encouraging that in the way that it's possible is good. So yeah, so my approach to like her learning was the things that she's kind of come naturally to her, great. And the things that don't, make sure that she's proficient, make sure she understands the importance of like, okay, you have to know how to read. Like you don't have to, you don't have to like read every day and be like super into whatever. But you know, you got to know how to read to get through life. Making sure that she's there, and then after that, she can either go with it or not go with it. But I don't see any value in like pressuring or pushing, making sure that like, oh, all your grades are A's, and now, and all her grades, by the way, are A's now. But if they weren't, then I wouldn't be disappointed. I wouldn't be unhappy. And in fact, I think still the best students are B plus, A minus students. You know, those are the students who are putting the work in, but they're clearly thinking about things to a degree where they're maybe thinking about them beyond or in a different way than their instructor is. So when I see students today in my classes, or students Ruby's age or whatever, who are getting like B plus, A minuses, and they're like, oh, I wish I'd gotten, you know, an A or something like that. I'm like, no, you were thinking about the material. And just because you didn't think about it in the exact same way that I taught it, that's not the goal. The goal isn't that you just replicate everything that I think and I'm putting out in the classroom, or that your teacher is putting out in the classroom. The goal is that you are thinking, you're learning how to think. And yeah, so I don't put a lot of weight on grades, but she is a very good student, and that's wonderful.
Yeah, they at my daughter's school, they do numbers like 1 to 3, and it's like it's done in a way where it's like a 3 is the highest, and but a 3 is like meets grade, you know, and the other thing is down. So they try to make it like as less sort of competitive as possible. But I just don't really care, because if I saw like a 2 or 1, I would get really upset, I know, and I'd be like, what are you talking about? So I don't really, it doesn't matter to me. And even with my son in high school, like, I know you're smart, and if you fluctuate, I don't care. Like, it doesn't matter to me, because I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but one of the reasons my son was in a private school was because I didn't want to put him in a public school and all of the problems that come with that, comes to just the education level system, socially, just having to worry about, are they going to be okay? And the private school was smaller, and it was real safe. And when you're paying thousands and thousands of dollars for your kids to go there, you have access to the teachers and the staff, and they're responsive to you and all of that. And so I really was concerned about those things growing up, and like, were they going to be able to be sort of safe and secure and all of that. And there's definitely some benefit to that sort of small classes. Like some years Jacob had 11 students in his class, and it was great because he got so much attention, and they had an assistant. But I am really weird on this, and that, I mean, I cover education. People are gonna be like, oh, well, that's why he's so weird. No, but like, I just don't understand our system. I don't understand why we have a system where we take our kids and we drop them off, or they take the bus, or they walk, or they bike, or however way you get there, and they're there all day, and then you go work. And then what's supposed to happen from 3 to 5 and 6 when people mostly work till that time? Like, how do people do that? Like, I've always just picked them up. I'm like, I gotta go. Let's do after school, or grandparents, or just sort of like. So in other words, our society structured so that most of their time, and it's because of financial reasons, is with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I never wanted to be a homeschool parent because of the stigma of that. And like, well, they're gonna be weird, and I say I've grown from this. I'm talking honestly, no one judge me, please. Like, this is what was in my head, and what's in my head is okay. I'm explaining what I was thinking at the time. It's like, well, my kid needs to socialize, and I don't want them to be sort of just by themselves all the time. And as we know, homeschooling has evolved so much so, and it's not that at all anymore. But I don't understand why we have to, like, I mean, I don't know if you dealt with this with your school, but drop off, like for preschool, kindergarten, it's horrible. It's hell when they cry and you have to like turn around.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, the best, the nurseries, preschool is like, the best way to do this is just turn around and go. I'm like, why would I ever do that? Like, shut up, stop.
Yeah.
I am not going to leave until she stops crying.
Well,
it's not good. And they're like, well, you're making it worse. And I'm like, this is not my fault here, but that whole system is so odd. Like, I wish there was some way we could like raise our kids in our home and have funding to do it, and figure out a way so we don't have to be apart for hours and hours and hours, and that becomes the norm. But I mean, you've kind of figured that out a little bit with your hybrid school, I guess.
yeah. Well, and with one thing our society does really well is commodify everything. And so commodifying childcare, commodifying even, family life, like all of that is, and what you were saying earlier about the expectation as a father to make money, and that your role as a man in society is to make money. That's what, so my role as a woman is to do like a million different things, but your role is one thing, which is to make money. And so like, we could look at both of those things, not in a comparison, but in the way that women are expected to be like all these different things. But when your one role is to make money and you don't make that much money, you're a failure as a man.
Thank you.
So just live with that. No, that's what our culture tells people. That's what our society tells people, is that's a failure.
Yeah.
And we know that that's not true. Like there's that messaging that we've internalized from culture, but we also know that that's not correct. We know that like there's many things that men should be as well as women. Mm-hmm. So when other dads might criticize you or kind of look at you in like a critical way, that's their own insecurity, right? That's their own insecurity of saying like, well, I'm not prioritizing my child. I'm prioritizing making money. And it doesn't matter if I'm making that money by like stomping on puppies. It doesn't matter that, right? It doesn't matter how I'm making that money is my point. I could be doing terrible things to make that money, but if my role is to make money and I'm not making money, then I'm a failure. And like, so you've internalized that idea, but you also know that it doesn't feel true when you're walking around looking at your children and wishing like, do I want to spend more time with them? Do I want to put in this work? Because then when they're older, they're teenagers, they're in their 20s, they're adults, and you didn't put in that work, you didn't put in that time. What do you think your relationship is going to be like? You expect to have this great close relationship with them as teenagers and as adults because like, oh, now they're older and I can hang with them and we can talk about real things, but you're not going to be able to talk about those real things or have like a loose good time. Loose good time. Have like a, a relaxed, good, easy time if you didn't put in the hard work early on to form a relationship where you're vulnerable enough to have that loose, free, fun time, right?
Yeah.
So when you talk about how other dads look at you as like a failure because you don't make that much money and like you're around your kids, and let's be honest, there's the question of why are men around kids? Like, do they have some sort of evil, pedophile intention? Why are they at this elementary school? They're not supposed to be here. That's insecurity speaking, and that's those people losing out on what's going to be like the long-term benefit of not just your child feeling secure today, but the relationship that you're going to have with them much later. And what was the thing that you just asked me? Because I know that's not what I was answering. You just asked me something about what was that?
Well, I was just asking about like this educational system and why isn't there funding for us to teach our kids at home, or why do we have to just take them away and then pick them up at later in the day? And
right.
I mean, it's a big picture, it's a status thing, but
the commodification.
It's wrong. Yeah, and it's like everything costs money in preschool. And by the way, I never went to preschool, and like it's so embarrassing because all this research comes out and it's like children who didn't go to preschool, like I'm like, well, duh, but we didn't have any money to go to preschool, like I spent time with like God knows who. I don't even know. I mean, I think I blocked out much of those years. I don't know where it was. But I didn't go to preschool. The first time I went to kindergarten was the first time I was ever away from kindergarten was the first time I ever went to like school, or any kind of preschool setting or like daycare or something. It was always like taken care of by people, family or not. And it's just backwards. It's just wrong. And you wonder like, why are some people here and some people are there? They're like, well, there's the resources for these people to be successful and not, and why is it backwards? But yeah, anyway, I was just wondering like, why do we do it this way? Like,
there's no money long-term in you staying home and not participating in the economy, right? Like we commodify parenting because there's money in commodifying parenting. There's not money in subsidizing you staying home with your kid for 5 years, which in the long run would be much better and much better for the next generation that takes over the economy. But in the short term, it means money lost in the GDP every year. And so we create this whole culture around it that guilts us into making enough money and tells us that like, oh, our kids have to be participating in a certain type of school and they have to be participating in this, they have to be constantly socialized, when in reality they're going to be socialized no matter if they're around people their age or people their parents' age or whatever. Like socialization is socialization. It's being around a diverse group of people. Homeschooling my daughter, like there's the criticism that I've heard multiple times, which is, oh, but the social aspect, and she's around other kids. And I even feel like compelled to tell people when they ask me what school she goes to, I start out with, oh, but don't worry, I'm homeschooling her. Don't worry, she's like around these other kids 2 days a week, and they're all freaking weirdos like she is. So let's see what they're like when they're adults. I think they're going to be more interesting than the kids who are like forced into conforming at junior high or high school or whatever. But that's another story. But yeah, I automatically like start with, she is socialized, she is around kids her age, because that's the criticism of homeschooling, which is you're depriving your child. And how long has this system of going to school till you're 18 been around? 150 years, and it's not even around in most of the world. So this idea that we have to be socialized, that we have to go to junior high and high school and learn to hate ourselves and learn that like we're not that like we should be thinner and taller and have bigger lips and bigger boobs and like no body hair, except we should have long mermaid hair flowing out of our head, but like zero body hair elsewhere. that you see a drop off of especially girls starting in junior high from science and math, that before junior high, boys and girls are on, or I should say all children are on par with math and science, but females in junior high and high school start to dip and drop. And I think a big reason, it's not even, I think research has shown that a big reason is because the focus on socialization and what a girl is supposed to be and how she's supposed to be presentable and pretty and attractive to, and that doesn't mean attractive, it means attractive to a certain cultural ideology. All of that sort of becomes the priority. And so you see all of this talent, all of this possible talent of these girls turning into women who could be these fantastic scientists, doctors who figure out the cure for cancer, figure out the cure for HIV, for COVID. All of that is wasted because of this forced socialization that we think is supposed to be the priority in their life over actual education. I mean, think about that. Like, we're essentially saying like, oh, the way that they're socialized and forced to be around their peers is more important than their actual education and the education that they're getting. Because, you know, my daughter is not lacking in education. She might be lacking in learning to hate herself and learning to, you know, shave every part of her body, but she is not lacking in education, and she's not lacking in confidence. And the goal is to raise a person who is not lacking in education, not lacking in confidence. When I found out I was having a girl, which, by the way, the ultrasound technician didn't actually ask me if I wanted to know. They just said, like, I don't know if that happens in movies or in television only, where they're like, what do you want to know? And they're like, I don't know, I think so. No, he just said, oh, it looks like a girl. I was like, oh, great. I didn't actually want to know that, but thank you. So as soon as I found out I was having a girl, I was like, oh man, it's going to be hard. And I started thinking, like, what's going to happen when she goes through puberty? How am I going to protect her from all the different cultural, human, everything that's going to tell her to hate herself and that she's not good enough? How am I going to protect her from that? So this was my solution. My solution was to make sure that the culture that impacted her the most, that she was around the most, was me and her family, not people that just happened to be her age. So yeah, I think we do things the way that we do because we get into cultural norms that that favor a tiny minority of the population, and the rest of us are trying to conform and fit into a box in order to keep that system of hegemony going. And anytime you deviate from it a little bit, it's like, but you're messing up your child. And it's like, maybe you're messing up your child. Like,
Yeah, well, as we know as teachers, you know, there's all kinds of people we meet at 18, 19, and they're very different. There's no there's no perfect way to raise a kid, and these people who raised it by the book and were super sort of took care of everything for them, we know that doesn't work for everybody. So to suggest that something alternative is a bad thing is not true either. I just really feel like you kind of have to get through it somehow and do the best job you can and try not to mess them up. Because and I know that sounds really, like, I think part of that too is though people think messing up involves like overt violence or abuse, but messing them up can be what they see, and what they see is what they're going to model, you know. And if they see the constant wine drinking or the mood swings or things, parents checking out and unpredictability or just not being home, or like these things are things that affect them as much as, you know, how someone would say, oh, you homeschool your parents. It's like, well, actually, no. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was attachment parenting and sleep schedules. Because when we originally were talking about, we should do a podcast on parenting. That was what came to my mind, and I'm sort of like interested because I think we're both attachment parents in that um, I was never the type, and people judged me all the time, like in our social circles, but like our kids never slept. Like put them down, went to sleep, woke up. Like it just never happened till they got older. And now we can do it. But this idea of putting them in the room and 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then eventually they fall asleep and they stop crying, never appealed to me. And in fact, I sort of like, how could you do that? That is just a horrible parenting. But then if you look at the science or some books or, depending on what science, there's research, I should say, that says, well, that's how they'll learn to cope and they'll learn to self-soothe. And if not, you're going to be sleeping with your kids till they're, whatever age, and you're not going to get any sleep. And I'm like, well, is that a bad thing? I mean, is it a bad thing to have a big bed and just kind of everybody finds their spot and they go to sleep and everyone feels snug? So do you want to talk about that? Like, what was your sort of role and how you did that with your daughter?
Yeah, my that's how I parented, was through the attachment parenting philosophy or whatever. I'd read about it when I was pregnant, and attachment parenting is exactly what it sounds like. You're attached to your child. So like wearing her instead of, like, I didn't have a stroller for her until she was basically too heavy for me to wear. And sleeping, co-sleeping, and there's all, her pediatrician, right, was like, oh, they can't sleep in the same bed unless you take all the sheets off and you just sleep on like a bare mattress. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's what I'm going to do then. Yeah, that you're going to roll over in your kid or whatever. Like, I'm not a heavy sleeper, so there was never a worry that I was going to roll over on her. And also she's always been giant, so that was yeah. But yeah, so from the beginning I was like, this is the way that they learn to trust, that they learn how to trust in humans, is that when they cry, they're responded to, rather than seeing children as manipulative. A lot of people kind of see children as manipulative. That's why maybe the preschool teacher told you that staying around because your kid was crying was just making it worse. That happened to me too, where like my daughter, I'd drop her off at preschool to go teach summer school or whatever, and she'd cry, and I'd stay with her until she stopped crying. And it would be like, no, they just forget about you as soon as you leave, like it's a manipulation. But it's, it's not. It's her transitioning to a new place, feeling anxious about it. And I'm not going to just be like, well, suck it up, So yeah, the philosophy of attachment parenting is to respond to your child so that they learn trust. They learn how to trust you and trust the world and trust their decision making and trust their instincts and all that good stuff that makes them a confident and strong person. And I remember explaining that to her grandparents, to her dad's parents, when I was pregnant, and they were just like, had like kind of passive aggressive criticisms of it, like, well, you're going to change your mind when you have a baby. That's a lot of it. It's like, oh yeah, you can go into parenting with all this philosophy, but you're going to change your mind as soon as you become a parent. But no, I kept her strapped to me for the beginning of her life. I kept her sleeping with me for a lot longer than the beginning of her life, until basically she moved out of the bed. When she was ready to do that,
and by the way, they do it on their own. Like, it's not like some weird thing. Like, there comes a time when, and they're just like, I'm good. And it's like, perfect. Like, I don't know, people who judge think they're staying there the rest of their life. Like, it's just like, I'm on my own bed now, and they do, and it's fine. It's
right. Yeah, exactly.
And then sometimes they, they will come back, they'll say, ask my wife, like, I want you to sleep with me, and she'll sleep with her. And it's like, that's just normal. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Why is it? I don't know. We get into the whole philosophy of like how we qualify, like sleeping with spouses is okay. So like sleeping with another adult is okay, but your child sleeping with you is for some reason going to destroy their psyche and their ability to be independent. Like, why is it okay to share, to co-sleep with some people, not co-sleep with other people? Um, and again, I'm sure people are like, well, this is why it's okay. Yeah, there are good reasons and bad reasons to do everything, but think them through beyond just, oh, that's weird, that's not what you're supposed to do. Think it through to, like, again, like, what is the goal? Is the goal to make sure that my child is comfortable, or is the goal to do something that makes me look like a good parent based on what good parenting is supposed to be? So attachment, I was all about attachment. I was all about having her close to me, and I still am. And she is, really, people keep telling me and have told me since she was a baby that there's going to be a point where she hates me and she's, she's trying to get away from me, and that's normal, and blah blah blah. That hasn't
Happen.
happened yet. Knock on wood. It hasn't happened yet, and I'm not sure that it would happen because of that time that we put in with attachment parenting. I'm not sure that she's going to end up just completely, like, rebelling against me. And really, like, how is she going to rebel against me? She's going to become like a conservative Republican. Like, that's the way she could rebel against me. There's not a lot of room for rebellion. But yeah, so I was all about attachment parenting, and again, criticism for it. But people criticize what makes them insecure because they're questioning whether they should be doing it, and it's easier to question somebody else than it is to question yourself sometimes.
She could
Right.
be worse. She could become a libertarian, not care about anything but herself.
Yeah,
No, just kidding.
exactly.
Well, it's funny, people too, with the whole attachment parenting, don't understand that even having the conversation is a privilege, because like a bed is a privilege. I mean, when I grew up, I slept on the couch or a mattress on the floor, like
Yeah.
not having the frame and the whole box and bed and all of that.
Box spring, fold out couch, floor, pop top of a VW van. So
yeah.
yeah.
And so like people come at it from, well, you need to have this certain standard. It's like, well, the first time I ever bought a bed was when after we got married. Like, before that, it was just whatever was around and available,
Right.
which is why today I can sleep anywhere. I fall asleep on the floor, the couch. Like, I don't need like luxury, like it's just
Right.
this. I can fall asleep right here in this chair, probably. So I don't know. It's sort of a weird thing, but I always did struggle as a parent with the sleep schedule, because what it would mean was just having to we were never able to put them down and have them just fall asleep. And so it meant sort of like waking up every couple hours and this and that sort of thing. One of the good things though was I developed this sort of sixth sense, was like twice, literally out of sleep, waking up and catching my children about to fall off the bed. Like, it's weird. Like, you develop this parental intuition of, you are sleeping, but you're actually, I don't know if that's like a primitive thing, but like evolution, but you're actually totally aware of everything going on with your child. They're not going to suffocate. Like, exactly where they're at, and you kind of wake up. And so the only times they've ever fallen out of bed is when they've been sleeping by themselves. Like, that's the only time, it's like, oh, what happened? We better go check on them, sort of thing, so I don't know. I remember falling asleep. Like, you lay them down, they finally fall asleep, and you lay them down, and you're just like, I'm not moving from this position. I'm just going to stay here for 2 hours, as long as I need to, even if I have no circulation in my arm, because they're finally asleep. And then slowly kind of ease up. I don't know, it's just, you just figure it out,
Right.
you make it work. So I don't know if other parents are lying, but like these parents you meet, like, what are you talking about? Set them down, they slept, it's fine. Like,
I know. That definitely was not my experience. That was the other thing, is that, like, if I had tried to put her in a different bed in a different room, and again, like you said, that's a luxury to have a different bed and a different room. that she would have just been very upset and, and I mean, there was a time when she wouldn't even sleep if I put her down in the bed next to me. There was a time where like she literally like was like on top of like here, and that's how she would sleep. And that was awful for me, but but she slept like that's what she was like when she was a baby, and that's how she felt comfortable, and that's how she felt safe. And again, parenting is something that's very hard, and you make the choice to parent the right way. That means that it's going to be hard sometimes, but again, like the goal in the long run is to create a person who's confident and capable, and following your instincts on parenting is I think one of the ways that we grow capable people is following that instinct of like, well, it doesn't feel right to like let her cry until she exhausts herself and realizes, oh, nobody's coming. Because that's the thing, is people are like, oh, they'll stop crying because they'll fall asleep, and they'll realize that they're just trying to manipulate you, like a baby. When in reality, they stop crying because they realize like nobody's answering me, like nobody's coming to help me. Like that's a very sad realization to have when you're 6 months old.
Right.
You should wait till at least 27 to realize that nobody's out there to take care of you.
Exactly. Yeah. You should wait till you're older to figure out how cruel the world is. Yeah. What do you do? And we have a few more minutes here, but what do you monitor, like television, movies? Does your daughter, do you go to the movies and watch whatever's on? Do you stay away from TV? How do you navigate that? Because like my approach is very much like, we'll watch anything, she'll know right away whether she likes it or not. And I mean, I'm not going to put on some horror movie, but if it's a cartoon, or if it's like just an interesting movie, cooking show, like I don't spend a whole lot of time with language, like even with songs, like playing songs in the car. And we had a conversation about the F word, and like, what does that mean? And it's like, oh, but you shouldn't really say it. And she's like, oh, it's like, that's, you could say it when you're older. Here's the right. We had that whole conversation about the F word, but do you take any of that into consideration in terms of their media and how they consume it?
No. No, I don't. She watches, whatever. I mean, again, she's 15 now, but and it's funny how we think like we're gonna limit them on what they're going to see on television. They have the internet, they have a whole pocket porn studio in their in their in their phone. So we think that we're not going to let them watch South Park, and they're not going to see like the grossest porn anybody's ever seen by just clicking something when they're alone in the bathroom with their phone. So one thing is kind of waking up to the reality of what's out there and what's available. It's not like back in the day when you stole your friend's brother's, hustler or Playboy that was behind their bed, and that was like the only exposure you had.
I
So
couldn't, yeah. I
so
know. Sorry, go ahead. I'll tell my story later. Go ahead.
so one thing is waking up to the reality of what's available to them, and for me it's more like they're going like, this stuff is out there, so they should know that they can talk to you and ask you about it, right? So like if I kept her from excuse me, from watching something and essentially turned it into like, no, 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 that's taboo. I mean, the human psyche just says like, okay, now I really want to know, for one. Like that's just basic psychology, is like, well, you're keeping it away from me, so I got to know. And they're not going to ask you about it. They're not going to ask you about the reality of like, does this really happen? Or like, is that real life? And you can say, and especially like, I mean, I know you started talking about television and I kind of turned it into porn, but especially with like porn on the internet, I mean, that stuff is not real. It's not real sex. It's not real intimacy. It's not real, it's not real human connection. So if they don't have the ability to say like, I just saw some funky stuff, like, does that happen? And you can say like, no, like this isn't reality, or if you don't want that to be reality, it shouldn't be reality or whatever. Like, so that for me, it's always been open open the door to whatever so that you can then talk about it, and they can kind of understand your perspective and understand. And yeah, so I've never really limited her on what she's going to watch, what she'll
You don't
what
have
she,
you never had the parental controls on the iPad or the computer or anything like that. Yeah.
I don't even know how to do that.
Yeah. Right.
No. How about you?
No, I just assume that would self-regulate,
Mhm.
with my kids, like if they decided to look, well, I have two kids, they're different age, but my older, he'd probably, if somebody sent something to him or he checked it out, he'd probably look at it and then move on with stuff. He probably would have no interest, it's just how he is. With my daughter, it's more like, are we watching the right kind of shows? What is she watching? Is she like when I grew up, I would watch Bugs Bunny, like Looney Tunes, cartoons, and like I put those on for her, and they're really violent, with like Yosemite Sam is literally shooting bugs in the face, and he survives every time, and hunting, and I'm like, I can't believe, but like I never saw it as that. I just thought it as like, this is funny. Like they're
Right.
chasing each other. You never saw it as violence, but then when you have a kid, you have to think about it. Like, am I teaching her that it's okay to shoot people by letting her watch this cartoon? And so, but what I found with my daughter is that she really likes complex storylines with like cartoons, which means older, like stuff that maybe not be appropriate for a 5, 6, 7-year-old. She likes stuff where there's conflict and layers and some sort of hero and a resolution, and it's ongoing, and that's not Bugs Bunny. So
Mhm.
there's definitely so I don't pay a lot of attention to that kind of stuff unless there's something horrible, like supernatural stuff. I kind of like probably don't want to watch that if there's going to be a demon or a devil presence or something like that. Like that's kind of not going to happen. But we watched this multiverse, the Spider-Man movie, and it was like really complicated. I don't know if you've seen it, and it was really layered, and had lots of violence, but she really liked it. It was really good. And I was like, I need to watch this again because I'm not sure I understood it the first time. And she's like, let me explain it to you. It's like, okay. So those minds, but it's just interesting that these are things that you have to think about that you don't think about when you don't have children.
Yeah. Well, for me, the thing I thought about was commercials. So I didn't want her exposed to commercials. So I've never had cable television around her. And she's born in the age of streaming. Streaming became bigger and bigger. But like when she was born, it was DVDs, and but I didn't want her exposed to commercials because I saw that as the beginning of body dysmorphia, the beginning of her learning that she wasn't perfect in her imperfections. You know what I mean? Like that um, that it promoted a marketing consumer ideology of what it meant to be feminine or female or a child or whatever. So for me, that's what I always tried to keep her away from. Now, because social media has developed in her lifetime and become a thing in her lifetime, it's harder and harder to keep her away from that kind of stuff. Like she's on Instagram, and she follows good accounts. And like when she first got on Instagram, I like really laid out, okay, you know, if somebody that you don't know tries to follow you, like absolutely not, you're not making friends this way. This is not a way for you to like reach out to people, and some random freaking Russian bot becomes your friend. Like, no, that's not going to happen. And I kind of like look at what she's following and stuff, and she follows good things. She doesn't follow uh, kind of vapid ideas of what it means to be a person, shallow. And 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 like one thing that you learn as a parent is that you can want to protect them from lots of things. Like I never wanted to sexualize every relationship. I find that from an early age, a boy and a girl, they'll be babies and people will be like, oh, they're boyfriend, girlfriend. It's like, no, I never wanted to do that because I didn't want to automatically turn every opposite sex relationship into like a potential romantic relationship, no matter their age. But I remember somebody doing that when she was like 7 months old with their son and her, and they're like, oh, it's his first girlfriends. And I remember thinking, oh, I can't control everything
Yeah.
people say to her all the time. So the best thing I can do is not do those things, but also kind of like point out to her, no matter what age, when I see something that is promoting body dysmorphia or promoting like sexualizing every male female relationship, or promoting something that is ultimately going to have like a negative limiting effect on her, is that I'll point it out and be like, oh, what do you think about how that happened? Or like I noticed that somebody was watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians on my Hulu account the other day, and I was like, oh great. So I talked to her about it. I was like, hey, you're watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians? She's like, no, like her dad is.
Oh God.
And so I pointed out, I was like, that's like, we talked about basically like what, like why those people are famous, what that show is about, like what it's promoting, that it's not actually, it's reality television, but it's not actually reality, because it's still like a performance. And so yeah, so with content, with movies and stuff, I've never been like, no, you can't watch that, there's violence in it or there's sex in it. But I've always tried to go about like, okay, limiting like how much commercial marketing she's exposed to. And then when she is exposed to those things, talking about it and being like, what do you think about it? And basically like promoting critical thinking around it. Like,
Yeah.
what does that mean when you see that? What does that mean when, yeah. So that's been my approach. It's worked okay so far, I think.
Yeah. I never seen an episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, by the way. Although I don't need to, because every time I'm on, the internet, there's Kim Kardashian's story. But that's another podcast. Okay. We should probably wrap up, but I think this has been really cool to talk to you about all this stuff and hear your perspectives and my perspectives. And
Yeah. And
it's
speaking of,
fascinating.
you have to go to Safety Town graduation, right?
Yeah, speaking
Yeah.
of, it's at 11:30, and of course every parent will be there to watch the counselors in training say nice things about their kid. But yeah, so I got to do that, and I have enough time to get there. And yeah, so anyway, it's really cool. And so what do we got coming up, Geordie? What's our next topic? We give our listeners and our viewers a little bit of a tease. Do we want to commit yet to what we're talking about? Or
I don't know. Do you have any ideas about what our next topic should be?
well, I know one of the things was want to talk about was community colleges and the importance of them, and why they matter, and why we don't need to be telling our kids it's like a bad thing to go to a community college, or like you couldn't get into somewhere else, or like we need to sort of flip that whole paradigm on its head, because that's just like ridiculous. Talk about being a teacher, and you were an adjunct for a long time. I'm still an adjunct, and what that means, and how adjuncts are treated, and just what it's like to be a teacher at City College. I think that's, really cool a topic. But I think we could talk about relationships. We could talk about like what it's like to be in our age and the new things that come up in life, and how we deal with that, and work and jobs. And I mean, there's a bazillion sort of things we can talk about. Oh, I know the one we want to talk about, which is your great idea, which is so cool, was language. Like,
Oh yeah.
the idea that we put so much focus on language and we judge. I mean, not you and I don't, because we're not like that. But I mean, there's so much focus on what's wrong with what people say. And the David Chappelle controversy, I think we wanted to talk about that, like how a lot of the critics never watched what he said. And so what does that mean? And even I see it in my job as a journalist. People just look at the headline and they'll comment on social media. And I swear, I just want to tell people right now, if you're not going to read the story, do not comment on social media about a story. Don't do it based on the headline, because you're just ignorant. But
Yeah.
I think so we don't use the right word to describe something. Don't judge at me. Like we're taught it's okay to talk out loud. It's okay to misspeak. It's okay to do these things. So I think that's going to be a good podcast for us to talk about.
Okay.
Well. Yeah.
That can be our next one, language.
Yeah.
And yeah, and all that goes into that. And keeping in mind that like we make all the words up, like they're all 100% made up. Yeah, and what that means. Yeah, I think that's good. That's what we'll do next time.
All
We'll,
right.
Geordie and Josh talk about talking.
And we want to sponsor. There's someone out there who wants to hear us talk. I know. So, all right. Have a great day.
All right, you too.
Bye.